offered by the Polish American Historical Association. My name is Iwona Flis, and I have the honor of serving as the second vice president of PAHA. And we began this webinar series during the pandemic as a cycle of occasional meetings as a way to stay connected and to share the results of our research within our community. And it kind of develop into an ongoing project. But before we begin with today's topic, let me briefly tell you a little about our organization for those of you who are maybe not so familiar with who we are. We are a community of scholars and enthusiasts dedicated to studying, preserving, and promoting the history of and culture of Polish Americans and the broader Polish diaspora everywhere. We hold a 3-day conference every January. We sponsor a book series through Ohio University Press, but we also have a smaller book series that we sponsor ourselves. We have numerous projects that our members work on, like Anya Miller and I work on a project, Objects That Speak. So if you happen to have any interesting object in your households, objects that can tell us some story, we invite you to join us in this project. We would like to explore these objects and post the story on our website. We also have a memoirs project, which chronicles the history of Poles in the diaspora. And of course, we have a scholarly periodical titled Polish American Studies. And you may learn more about our organization at our website, polishamericanstudies.org. Today, we have a presentation by Agata Zborowska. So let me introduce our speaker shortly. Agata Zborowska is a cultural historian and with a background in cultural studies and cultural anthropology. She's an assistant professor at the University of Warsaw and currently a Marie Skłodowska-Curie Global Fellow at the University of Chicago and Catholic University of Leuven. Her project, titled Circular Archives of Ordinariness, Vernacular Moving Image Practices and Migrant Identity in Polish Chicago, investigates home movies and related oral histories of Polish Chicago before the digital era, aiming to challenge and broaden our understanding of evolving migrant and diaspora identities. As a Chicago Film Archive scholar in residence, Agata Zborowska works with the Polish Diaspora Film Collection to increase community access to archival materials. Her research has been supported by the European Commission, by the Kościuszko Foundation, Franke Institute for Humanities, University of Chicago, National Film Preservation Foundation, Larvik Conservation Fund, and the Polish National Science Center. The topic of her presentation today is entitled Familiar Records, Home Movies and the Oral Histories Archive of Polish Chicago. The presentation examines vernacular moving image practices and related oral histories as sources for studying the transformation of Polish American diaspora identities. It discusses the preliminary findings of the aforementioned project, Critical Archives of Ordinariness, Vernacular Moving Image Practices and Migrant Identity in Polish Chicago, shortened to Not So Ordinary. I really like the name of the project. Following critical archive studies called to empower communities underrepresented in historiography by developing and interrogating archival collections, the project juxtaposes home movies, that is ordinary motion pictures created for family, for close friends, with interviews with their creators to uncover the not so ordinary potential of this underused source for studying minority groups. In this presentation, Agata Zborowska shows how analog home movies offer unique insights into intimate moments in the lives of individuals and families, as well as experiences of migration, adaptation of to new environments, changing lifestyles, habits, values, norms. At the end of the presentation, we will have a question and answer session. If you have questions during the presentation, then I would invite you to write them into the chat. But you'll have also an opportunity to ask a question after the presentation. We are going to have an hour or an hour and a half for the whole webinar. So without further ado, let me give the floor to our speaker.
Thank you so much for this generous introduction, and thank you so much again for the invitation for the webinar. Thank you, Ivona, for organizing this event. So I will speak. So I have a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation, a lot of films that I would like to show. So I think that the presentation is about 40 minutes, more or less. So you will see a lot of material. So I will share my screen now. And see if the technology will cooperate. Let's see. Okay. So do you see my presentation at the moment?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So let's start with this. Okay, so in 2019, I'm sorry, while searching for materials about the daily life of the Polish community in Chicago, I visited the Newberry Library, and a note for those not from Chicago. The Newberry is a large independent research library specializing in the humanities, local history, genealogy, and the American Midwest. And I made an appointment with the curator of genealogy and local history, who, after pointing me to some organizational records of Polish American historical institutions in Chicago, summarized my search by stating that Poles immigrating to the US, like other ethnic groups, busied themselves with hard work and did not leave behind grassroots produced materials of daily life. So for immigrants, everyday life was not so much an object of contemplation and documentation, as I was informed. Instead, everyday life involved a renewed daily effort to ensure the family's survival, which, due to limited leisure time and insufficient cultural and economic capital, was not preserved in the archival records. So I have just shown you, or I'm just showing you, a fragment of a film from Adam Glinka's collection that is archived at Chicago Film Archives, which not only challenges the belief that immigrants lack the time and interest to document their everyday lives, but it also shows that people took their moving image cameras even to work, to their workplaces, to record this part of their lives. In Adam's Glinka case, it was a metal shop in Chicago. That was his first job, and he decided to record it on his one of his home movies. So he has a lot of impressions about people he met at the very beginning, and the film is also about buying a new stuff and new equipment in one of the shop in downtown Chicago. So I'm starting with this self-reflective parable as the entry point of my presentation, not just because it was like inspirational touchstone for me, not even to point out stereotypes of immigrants, which are not entirely untrue, but definitely represent like a reduced form of representation repeated even by research institutions dealing with the local history. Rather, I do so primarily because this example reminds me of the importance of the efforts of various counter-archivist initiatives that help to preserve histories absent from the official narratives and official archives, and tell stories of individuals and groups underrepresented in the records of official institutions. So ahead of my return to Chicago in October 2023, I had identified only one Polish-American family's home movie collection, which had recently been donated to Chicago Film Archives, the official partner of this project. And my goal was to create from scratch an archival collection of home movies and related oral histories of a particular cultural group born of migration. So as of February 2024, the archive has expanded to 42 film collections, each containing between 2 and 120 movies, spanning both film and video formats, and 40 more and more, I would say, interviews, like semi-structured oral history interviews. The number is still growing. So to date, more than 300 films have been digitized. So the archive production process involves community members, filmmakers, and their relatives. So my archival objective is to preserve material films and what the records contain, but also to preserve how people experience and engage with the records by watching the digitized films together with the filmmaker or the family members or relatives. So as Rick Prelinger, an American archivist and the founder of the Prelinger Archives that preserve ephemeral films, reminds us, quote, "The system in which the record is created, transmitted and distributed is itself a fragile assembly of information and in need of archival attention," end quote. So the memory work performed through engagement with community members helped me to reflect on and to theorize my archival practice and revise also some of the original assumptions about the diasporic vernacular visual production. So today's presentation will focus on the process of creating an archive based on ethnicity as a provenance and the specific features of the diasporic archive. So the presentation is organized around 4 features. So the first one is, I will discuss is generations. Another is interethnicity. Next, language. And at the end, invisibility. So except for 2 collections, I found all the other home movies in private family archives, private family collections in private homes. So this process involved identifying potential families and individuals in Chicago, but not only, as well as reaching out to various Polish communities in Chicago, Chicagoland, I should say. So trying to create the broadest possible representation of various groups that migrated to Chicago from different regions of Poland and for different reasons at different historical moments usually requires finding gatekeepers and building relationships of trust. And I was able to reach some specific groups such as Polish Highlanders only after several months of persistent efforts to connect with them. So it's not always easy. So creating an archive from scratch not only has a great potential, but also opens up a cascade of questions. So what should be included in the diasporic archive? What events, situations, and topics should be represented? It is usually said in shorthand that home movies are daily recordings of everyday life, but they are somehow distinguished from that everyday life, such as birthdays, weddings, and holidays. And they often record events that happened not every day, thus capturing a kind of not so ordinary everyday life. So after this preliminary remarks, I would like to move to the first feature of the diasporic archive, generations. So most of my narrators come to the US without a moving camera. They bought their first equipment only in the new country, often only a few years after arrival when their economic situation stabilized. So when discussing why they bought a movie camera, even years later, they emphasize how important it was to see and document the new country and then also show it to their families and friends. So from accounts collected in the late 1980s in Poland among members of the Polish Highlanders community, we know that the camera was one of the items eagerly purchased overseas and then taken to Poland. Oral history interviews in my projects are recorded on camera, not only with people who migrated to the US themselves, but also with like subsequent generations who either shot films or are in possession of movies shot by their parents or grandparents. In situations where I no longer have access to filmmaker, the films are contextualized and narrated by their children or grandchildren, subsequent generations of Polish Americans. And the inclusion criteria are based on their declared identity and the connection to their Polish roots. So they express or contact me and want to talk about their Polish identity, of this part of their identity that contains many other possibilities also. So thus I'm talking to the first, second, third, or even fourth generation of Polish Americans. So it can be said that the archive is temporally unfixed, to borrow Tamara Ryan formulation, because the stories belong both to the past of parents and grandparents and to the present day diaspora of their children and grandchildren. So far, the boundary of this diasporic archive is drawn by the fifth generation, that in case of my research tends to define themselves not as Polish Americans, but as Americans of Polish descent or just Americans. And their identification with Polish identity is weak, not to say non-existent, and their willingness, that's pretty important, or ability to speak about their family's ethnic identity and related practices and experiences is very limited. So instead of making arbitrary decisions, I allow such cases to define the boundaries of the diaspora archive themselves. And according to this approach, this boundary may, I believe, may shift in the future. So as the interview shows, the process of identification can be like dynamic, and diasporic identity is like sometimes reborn in subsequent generations. Interestingly, some of my interlocutors can point to a specific moment in time when their like self-identification changed, when their ancestry became a reference point, not only for the lives of their parents and grandparents, but also in their own experience as Polish Americans. And I would like to share here two short excerpts from two different collections. So for subsequent generations born in the 1960s and 70s, a significant event was the election of a Pole, Karol Wojtyła, as a Pope John Paul II, often cited as a pivotal moment in appreciating one's ancestry and the revival of Polish identity. And the election showed, as often my interlocutors pointed out, that a Pole can. So my interlocutors link this event to the end of jokes about dumb Polacks, which were very popular, remembered by them from their childhood in Chicago. So in this respect, the home movies of the Polish Pope's arrival in Chicago, as you see, are records not only of this like personal experience, but also can be interpreted in the context of like generational identity experience in successive generations of Polish Americans. So this particular film is from Adam Glinka collection again, and it shows the arrival or the way through the south side of Chicago, where when the Pope celebrated Mass as Five Holy Martyrs Church. I have also another film that documented this particular moment, and this film is from Kazimierz Szarek collection. Kazimierz Szarek recorded like more than 20 films from his after his arrival to the US. Both of these people, like both Kazimierz Szarek and Adam Glinka, didn't have camera in Poland. They both a camera in Chicago after their arrival. So the quality of those films are very different, but because they are all or mostly recorded on Kodachrome stock film, bought in the US, they are usually much better quality than the films that were recorded at the same time in Poland, for example, because people used German or USSR stock materials that are fading and changing, colors. I have some of that kind of examples in the collection, in the archive. So it's really interesting to see that the differences. So as you see, the event, as you probably also know from Poles and Polish Americans living in Chicago at that time, this was a very important event that is celebrated even today. Each year, like every year, there's a mass that celebrate this event. So when talking about the Pope and ethnic identity, I cannot fail to mention that after the last election of the Pope Leo, memes appeared on the internet, mainly on Facebook groups for Poles and Polish Americans living in Chicago, accompanied by the comment "born in Chicago," so basically Polish. So this humorous statement refers to the fact that historically Chicago has been home to one of the largest Polish population outside of Poland, often referred to as American Warsaw. So the second feature I want to discuss is interethnicity, which in the context of my project and this presentation concerns so far mainly like interethnic marriages, but certainly can also take I think other forms. So to such examples in the archive involve people who reach out to me after seeing information about the project on one of the Facebook groups dedicated to history of Chicago, or heard about my project from like their friends or relatives. So when first contacted by email, a person usually tries to like specify a percentage of their ethnicity and their relation to the city. So as one person wrote to me, quote, "I'm 100% Polish and lived on the south side of Chicago," quote. So in subsequent generations, however, the situation may be more complex. So on another day, I received an information from other a person, and this is a quote. My material family is 100 Polish. My paternal side is 100 Italian, hence my name. I currently live in Chicago. My mother and her brother grew up in South Chicago with my grandparents, who were both born in Poland. Family name Radosz from Stopnika. End quote. So like after the interview with Renault Vision, I received another message from him in my email box. So he wanted to add something. So this is a quote: "By the way, I was talking with my brother today and realized that even though we share a lot of the same memories, he has a few more bits of information that I do not. Though his Italian father basically disappeared by the time he was 3, technically he is 100% Polish DNA." So, end quote. So watching movies together often involves telling who is who in the family. And in the case of interethnic families, my interlocutors want to ensure I know who has which ancestry. So my other interlocutor, Dave Pavlatos, discussing ethnic relations within his family, noted that his mother, being Polish, was never fully accepted by the Greek side of the family. And a home movie shot of Dave's parents' wedding shows that the ceremony took place in a Greek church in Chicago, not a Polish one, which may have been difficult for the Polish side of the family to accept, especially since Polish families have traditionally been strongly attached to their own churches in Chicago. So these kind of examples of ethnically like mixed families also provide an interesting borderline example for the diasporic archive. And I can also add that Dave, who keep the collection, the family film collection, couldn't really say a lot about those films. He don't recognize people. He was like a small child at that time. He recognized his, of course, parents and some relatives, but he couldn't even say who make the pictures in this film, who is with the camera, who is this young boy. So it's sometimes really difficult, especially when you talk about the following generations, to reconstruct even what's going on or who is in those films. So it's also pretty important to me to find as much as possible people from one of the family who can narrate these images. So let's move on to the next feature I want to discuss, which is language. And my interlocutors in various ways attempt to demonstrate that they know the Polish language, so understand it to some context or remember at least selected words or phrases. So they want to prove that they know the differences between Polish and the so-called Chicagowski language, a specific amalgamation of Polish and American English. And this is intended to demonstrate the Polish identity by showing familiarity with language differences and nuances. So as one of my interlocutors pointed out to me, quote, "We always said babka, never busia for grandmother. The word busia is used by Americans, as he said, meaning people who are far removed from the Polish identity." However, it is up to my interlocutors to choose the language they prefer for the interview. So to prove their attachments to the diasporic identity, they sometimes select Polish as the language in which the interview is conducted, even if it is their second language and much more challenging to speak and describe the experiences. Not to mention, that sometimes it is also much more difficult to understand for the recipient. So conversely, for those raised in Chicago speaking Polish, the language tends to fade over time, or it is used only in specific contexts such as prayer. And often the Polish language was never taught at home and functioned as a secret language reserved for communication between parents and grandparents. But what is the significance of the language in mostly silent films, I would like to ask. So most home movies recorded on 16mm or more often regular 8mm or super 8mm before the video camera with sound approached. The symbolic format is the super 8. So there's most of the collection are recorded on super 8mm movies, and they are all silent. So however, even in the film, if the film doesn't have recorded sound, there are examples of incorporating written language to identify a diasporic movie. As in the case of this film, the film was recorded on 16mm, so the quality is really beautiful.
Yeah, okay, well, listen, I just heated up my coffee when you called, so let me talk to you. Well, I want to eat. Yeah, you're right. I want to eat. Bye.
So the film is entitled Easter, where the title cards were used also to structure the narrative. And the film comes from the Lorish family collection, which was found by chance by Jan Lorish at the Polish Museum of America. So Jan Lorish was the longtime director of the museum, now works there as a historian, and probably brought the films to the museum after his parents passed away, and then simply forgot about them. So it was only my search for home movies that refreshed his memory and led to the rediscovery and digitization. So there's not a lot of in this collection, about I don't know, 6, maybe 10 home movies. They, as I said, were all recorded by Jan Lorich's father. around 50s and 60s. So this is like a very nice also example of using Polish language to structure the narrative, and the narrative is pretty complex when we think about home movies that are usually just like spontaneous recordings. So here are examples that shows more structured and thought narrative of this home movie. And the collection was digitized by me, but it's still in the Polish Museum of America archive, as also the other documents from the Loroś family. So you can see in this film Jan Loroś himself, but also his younger sister and his mother that was really active in the Polish community in Chicago. And the stories about her absence in the family trip to the botanical garden in Chicago. So another intriguing example is the film from Century, where Polish names were marked with cards placed on the graves. I didn't have a chance to speak with the person who kept the family collection. We didn't like record the screening and the watching films together, but in the absence of such like indicators, I mean like language indicators, metadata left on cans and boxes also might be helpful. Sometimes this metadata may reveal the changes in the native language when it comes into contact with like American English, or in cases of the adoption of the so-called Chicagowski language. And this particular films come from the extensive collection of Binkowski family, and the collection includes like nearly 100 films shot by Michelin Jamiński's mother. So this is also like interesting example of a woman who shot all the films or most of the films. So how do you recognize a diasporic home movie? How can you see its Polishness? That's another question I posed myself. As another researchers of ethnic home movies often ask, what makes home movies of Finnish, Irish, Italian, or Polish origin different? Quote, there's nothing Polish about my home movies, end quote, my interlocutors often reply in response to my interest in the home movies of the Polish diaspora in Chicago. Like others focus on where the films were shot, referring to the second part of the like Polish Chicago formulation in my project. Quote, my father had the camera and the films are from the 50s and 60s. My grandmother's mother was born in Chicago, father's side, and my mother had some relatives here, but all the films I have are from Michigan, end quote. So when creating a diaspora archive, should ethnicity be visible in the film? If so, how do we recognize a particular identity? How can we distinguish it from the other ethnic identities? So when it comes to the content of film, ethnic visibility can be, I would argue, gradable, ranging from clearly expressed to barely noticeable or absent. So let's start with the first group of films where ethnicity is virtually invisible, meaning that it is impossible to see like any traces of ethnic identity in the films. So this applies to many, many home movies, so which are not particularly different in terms of subject, as you can expect. So they show their leisure activities, vacations, birthday or weddings. And I really like this film, especially the ending, which you see in a moment, which remained a mystery to me for many, many months. And the case also proves how important interviews are in the process of creating a home movie archive. So I will let you see the end of the film, and then I will tell you what it really depicts. So let's wait a few seconds. So this collection comes from Buchko family, and it was also recorded on 60mm camera, which was much more expensive at that time. I mean, like in the 50s, 60s. It was available from, I believe, from the 20s, but not a lot of families has access to this format. So you see this pretty interesting situation. So from an interview with Christine Buchko, I learned that her father, who shot all the films in this collection, worked as an insurance adjuster. So the film documents one of the cases he worked on, and as Christine told me, that I can like remove this film from the collection because it's not really about home movie, and I would of course not do this because it's really interesting. Okay, so ethnic identity is often like reconstructed during the interview, where my interlocutors themselves seek traces of Polishness, convinced that the customs their parents or grandparents practice are Polish. Quote, "Is this something Polish?" as one of the interlocutor asked me when trying to confirm a particular custom. Another quote, "I always thought it was a Polish tradition that we do that because we are Polish," end quote. So, however, these are often unfamiliar cultural practices to me, and I find it pretty difficult to confirm their like Polish origins. So in the second group, I include those films in which ethnicity becomes identifiable in the cultural or historical context, if the cultural or historical context is known. So an example of this is a film shot just after the Polish Constitution Day parade in Chicago, but also this one this is an interesting example from also a huge collection of more than 100 films from Victoria Agata Zborowska, and it records, or she recorded her mother and her children just returning from the church with the Eastern basket. But you need to know a little bit more about the Polish customs and how they, operated to know that it might be like a Polish family or Polish American family, but you need to know something about knowledge about the city space, architecture, and history, and that's that such diasporic traces also can sometimes be misleading. Take for example, like culinary traditions such as particular dish like dumplings or donuts In the case of Chicago, however, pierogi and pączki have long since ceased to be associated with one ethnic group and have become an integral part of the city's landscape. So the diasporicity is therefore visible not to everyone and may not be so apparent or depending on who is looking. So the last group of films includes a situation when the diasporicity is directly visible in the film's content. So this often applies to recordings from public events where various ethnic symbols and signs such as red colors, white and red colors, a Polish flag are particularly prominent, and ethnic identity is deliberately manifested, as here in the Polish Constitution Day Parade in Chicago. So since so this is also a film from Victoria Agata Zborowska, a collection, as I said, of more than 100 films recorded on 16mm camera. And Victoria Agata Zborowska was a mother of Mary Anselmo, who some of you may know, and her mother belonged to the second generation of Polish Americans and ran a grocery store in Chicago with her mother. So this is also interesting that she recorded on 16mm and as an owner of a small grocery store in Chicago. And this collection is pretty amazing because it also depicts a family life in Chicago in the 50s, 60s through the 80s. So we are now moving to the last part of the presentation. Maybe I will go through this slide. As Elisa Leboeuf in her text on film camera and the experience of migration noted, the camera as peripatetic migration machine is not simply a recording device that captures the experiences of the displacement. It can be a symptom of that very displacement. Here, the process of documenting and a display's subjectivity via the cinematic apparatus, or it is used to, as it used to be called, the motion picture camera, reveals within the seeds of its own destabilization, end quote. So as I mentioned, the vast majority of my interlocutors bought their first movie camera only after immigrating to the US. So the very act of migration itself was not recorded on the film. And the camera is both an effect and also a very important symbol of upward mobility in this situation. Sometimes not only upward mobility, but sometimes more economic success, I would say, because it was not only social class difference compared to the Polish, the situation in Poland for those people, but very often the economic situation just improved, even if people work in places doing some manual labor. And, as such, the camera allows the documentation of border crossings, but not their own border crossing, but usually relatives. So I show those two short examples from Wróbel collection of films from this one collection, which consists largely of recordings of farewells and greetings at airports in Chicago and Warsaw, as you see here in Poland, but also seaports, for example. So home movies document this transnational context, temporarily visits by relatives to Chicago, and also travels to Poland, and also documents these visits on the countryside, for example. So the archive I'm building focuses on this specific diaspora, the Polish community in Chicago. However, the features of diasporic home movie archive and archival practices that I discussed today, generations, interethnicity, language, and invisibility, are, I believe, not limited to this case. So I'm developing this set of like theoretical categories while considering the specificity in relation to other diasporas in the US, and whether, while acknowledging the differences between different diasporas, they can also be useful outside of the strictly Polish context by like offering a framework for comparative analysis across different diasporic settings and ethnic communities, and also for like theorizing the interplay between like minority identities and the like vernacular visual practices, I mean like movie making in this case. So for now, I will leave this question open, but I would also like to share with you, show you this website of my project, where you can find the movies that were already digitized, and I will show you this, and this is in the collection tab here. You can find you know, home movies that were already digitized, but there's much more. I just don't have enough time to upload all those materials to the website, and the website definitely in the future will look differently. But as you see, it's organized around like a family collections, but it also needs definitely like some keywords that will help identify some topics and time of producing films. So that's definitely a plan for the future. If you are also interested in you know, supporting this project of digitization of the heritage, I also included on my website you know, possibility to donate some money for the digitization that is like really expensive, as you can expect. So 3 minutes of film, which is 50 feet of film, may cost even $40. We are talking about the archival, you know, quality. You can be also sure that all those films that were digitized this way will appear on the website and will be, you know, accessible online for all the users. And I hope that in the future it will be organized more friendly for the users. So maybe I will stop here, and I would love to hear some of your comments, questions if you have, and I will stop, probably share the presentation. How to do it? Okay, stop sharing.
So thank you for this fascinating presentation on a fascinating topic. It really highlighted how vernacular moving image practices can serve as a powerful source of archival source for understanding not only Polish American migrant identities, but can apply to in broader diasporic context. So now we have a time for questions from the audience. There is one question on the chat from Mark Dillon, and the question is, did you gather any films of owners or operations at Polish American delis or butcher shops in Chicago?
Yes, but those films, I'm always looking for not only like recordings from the family life, but also would like to find some recordings from the workspace, and it's really difficult. But I have a lot of collections from family who run a bakery shop or work in the meat industry. So there's a lot of that kind of materials, because people were able to buy a movie camera, yes, because this is the entry point, I would say, to record anything. So they have enough money, like owners of the, as I said, grocery stores or bakeries, to buy a movie camera and record it. But as I said, there's not a lot of documentation of this work life. So I really, appreciate when someone decided to take the camera inside the shop or inside the bakery. And there are some that kind of examples, but not a lot, I need to admit.
Mhm. Thank you. And we have two messages from Mark Dobrzycki. One is a comment that it was very likely Garfield Park Conservatory. And his question is, what was the most surprising discovery of your research?
So I think that these are two important topics that appeared in the Chicago context. So one of this is the class context, and the other is a gender one. I mean, like in the context of the U.S., when you compared home movies that were collected in Poland, this is really striking how many of those films were recorded by women. So I'm not saying that the number of films recorded by women like exceeds those recorded by men, but there's like a huge representation of women who decided that they want to have their like home movie camera, like a movie camera. They often receive it as a present, like a Christmas gift, and decide to record like everyday life through the next decade. So that was pretty surprising for me, but I of course also were looking for that kind of materials to see if they exist and if they were preserved. And another thing is that blue collars workers in Chicago, but in the US, I believe. Recorded a lot of home movies. These were people who probably in the Polish context were not be able to buy a movie camera because it was too expensive and the access to the technology was very limited for them. So in the context of America in the 50s and 60s, it also, of course, the situation changed a lot. But the manual, the people who work in as a blue collar workers were able to buy a movie camera, and it was like it's pretty fascinating that people who migrated to the US, they also like recorded their everyday life as a working class families. So these, I would say that these are two very important insights, and and it was surprising for me how many of those films were recorded by women and working class families.
Oh, that's a very interesting discovery. Okay, do we have any more questions from the audience? You may ask question also directly, not via the chat if you prefer, but you have to unmute yourself first.
Agata, Mark Dobrzycki here. You mentioned about how important the election of Pope John Paul II was for the American diaspora, especially in Chicago because of his visit here. What would be the next most important item that was represented in the film collections that you have so far viewed and recorded, digitized? Religious moments, personal moments. What would be the next most important element that was shown in these home movies?
So I think that I think it's important to take the context, to think about the context and what kind of topics appeared in the interviews, and what is really important from the perspective of Polish identity and Polish American identity in Chicago is definitely more personal things, like when the first generation that came to Chicago pass away, especially the death of grandmother Busia is like very important point of reference for many of my interlocutors. That was something that really, the grandmother, not so much grandfather, but definitely a grandmother, was a person who linked their Polish identity with Poland itself. That was a link that was something that was bring to Poland, from Poland to the US, and keep all the traditions, and was often grandmother was often responsible for keeping the traditions, passing the traditions, and after the grandmother passed away, the situation is changing, and people often express the sadness of this event, and also mark this event as an important for the family life, and how the family were thinking about the Polish identity. It was something different for them after the first generation that came to the US from Poland migrated. When they pass away, there's a lack of this very physical and very meaningful link to Poland.
I have one more question, and that is, in viewing the movies and keeping the differences of economics and politics out of this discussion, how would you compare the Polish people in America to the Polish people in Poland during this period of time, from your knowledge and experience?
Well, it's difficult to compare because I didn't. I don't have the same materials from the Polish perspective. So this is like a future project to compare home movies and interviews collected in Chicago with materials and interviews that might be collected in Poland, to compare those two perspective. I wouldn't, as a researcher, as a scholar, I would not. I don't want to do these comparisons, but definitely it's also the topics of politics and are often keep away from the interviews. I don't have a lot of questions about politics, but I often allow people or create a space when people can express their thoughts and how they how the politics was important for the family and or not. So this is a very important question, I would say, but I don't have enough data to compare those two perspectives with the Polish material. But I hope that I will be able to do so in the future, because it's definitely interesting to see how the findings in Chicago can be compared and can be seen or reflected in the Polish context. So thank you so much for this question, and I hope to address it in the future.
Thank you.
Yes. Are there any more questions from the audience?
I have a question, and I suggested it by raising my virtual hand. Agata, thanks a lot for this inspiring presentation, and thank you so much for all the important work that you're doing in Chicago, documenting the everyday life of Polish and Polish diaspora, including Polish Americans. I have a question about whether you have been able to discover any other than Highlanders regional group that is important for the Chicago Polish diaspora. I know that yeah, I know about Highlanders, but I'm wondering whether you have been able to trace Podlasiaki families and their home collections, or perhaps Tarnów people. That this would be my guesses. Mhm.
Yeah, so I reach out to those different communities in Chicago, as I said, also to to make it more representative, to cover also different groups of people who migrated from different regions. But it's often pretty difficult to trace it in this way because, as you of course know, the Highlanders are so well represented in Chicago and such an important group. Also because they very strongly identify as a group and want to be perceived that way, and it's much more challenging to do so in the context of other groups. So I have some examples, but examples from this different regions, people who migrated and how they narrate their migration, and but it's not very often, I would say, a regional identity, so they not very often stress this part of their life. I have some very interesting, like the collection. I showed some films from more rather some images and boxes from the Michelle Yamiński, who recently contacted me, and she has this an amazing collection of her mother's home movies, and that was an important part of this collection is a documentation of Polish clubs in Chicago. So so this is very interesting collection also because most of the collection is recorded on the meetings, during the event that were organized by Polish clubs. So this is another maybe approach to also look for these regional affiliations and try to find people. That's my plan for next month, how to also reach out to people from these clubs, for example, that the identification and the willingness to create a more community that was linked to a specific region in Poland was important. So yeah, so that's all I can say. Definitely more work needs to be done here. So I probably spend more time in the next few months, since I can still try to find people and reach out to people about this regional affiliations, but they were not something, I contacted people from Silesia. I tried to contact people from groups that still meet together as a specific group that are connected with the region, but it was not so successful, unfortunately. So I mean that they didn't have a lot of home movies. That's the problem, because that's the entry point for me. So I start with the home movies and then I interview people. But definitely, it definitely looks different. It would looks differently if you just need an interview, not documents from this period, from the 20th century.
Thank you.
I got a quick question on what you just said. Do you think it might be more so that the Highlanders, the Górale, identify not by town or township, wioska albo gmina, but more so by the region? So it encompasses a much larger area, while the other immigrants to Chicago identified more so with a city or town. And that's why the Highlanders have a greater representation. I think they less differentiate themselves by where they were born or where they lived, as opposed to other immigrants that came and say, I'm from Warsaw, or I'm from Rzeszów. There was some Kashubian presence in Chicago, but that seemed to disappear as the immigration fell, and then some other regions of Poland, but also the immigrants that came to this country seemed to kind of dissipate. Would you say that's an accurate summary of that?
Well, I think this is like, yeah, thank you for this question, this comment. And definitely the success of Górale in Chicago is that they both identify with their like village or a town, but at the same time create this alliance of this cultural clubs and heritage clubs. So that's give them also like, I think, broader representation of their culture, but it's also like similar in Poland. I think this is like probably one of the most visible and like coherent group of regional identification also in Poland. So this comparison, you know, it's also interesting because I think that, you know, the strength of Górale identity in Poland is also very, very important. So, and they created, or they were able to create the same, or I'm not sure the same, but like a similar a group of. But it also what is interesting, I think, in the context of Highlanders, Polish Highlanders in Chicago, is that it also has a history. When I spoke with like a very different people from the community, they also, you know, they also described that it was not always like that. You know, the heritage clubs were not always so cooperative, that were not always work together. So it's the situation which we see now, that you know, the Highlanders culture and the Highlanders Alliance is so you know, important. It was not always like that. So the Highlanders House and the you know, the alliance was not so strong, and people often, you know, try to narrate this history, that we see this this situation from this point of view, but it was not always like that. They just, you know, they develop it, they created it, and this was like an effort that you see in this and narratives of you know, President Jan Król now, when he really tried to keep the Highlanders House as an important place, which is really difficult because it's in a place like on the map of Chicago that there's not a lot of Highlanders anymore. But this is like another discussion. I think that they were both, they keep both this heritage clubs, but can be like the larger association is really important here.
Yeah, dziękuję. Yeah, and with that, the Highlander House, the neighborhood which encompassed that Five Holy Martyrs parish, had a very strong anchor because of the religious influence as well as the cultural influence has changed much, and so yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, I don't see any more questions, any more raised hands. So maybe I'll have one question. I'm very much interested how these home movies creators have responded to seeing their intimate archives used in research. Could you add a little more about that?
So the reactions are very like different, I would say. So some of the people are really surprised that like the home movies, like the private family records, can be used as a historical source, and sometimes it's very positive for them. Like they, you know, they want to share it. They understand the importance of like for the history of you know, Poles in Chicago, but in general, the history is important for them, and they understand that it can be an interesting source. Some of the people I are not so sure if the home movies of their home movies should be used in this way. So so they are really concerned about, you know, media, about AI, and about the whole context of internet, about the open access to their private materials, etc. So we discussed this, you know, topics very thoroughly. So I'm trying to explain what's, you know, what will be the situation after publishing those films. Some of those films were, you know, sometimes I interview people, and after that they didn't agree to 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 allow the films to be like uploaded and put online. So people are really like concerned about different things. But in general, I think that the importance of documenting and preserving the history of Polish diaspora in Chicago is, you know, is something that people just accept, and really they are really happy that someone is looking for that kind of materials. Often those materials are, you know, throw away. It's also different in the context of different generations. It's much easier for like a second, third generation to share the movies that were recorded by their parents or grandparents, because I think the attachment is not so strong. The attachment is strong in a way of like emotional attachment of the memory, etc. But it's not something that they, you know, think that they are not so afraid of sharing. I think it's something more personal for people who recorded those movies. Sometimes they are very proud of this and they want to show it, but sometimes it's just so rooted in their experiences, memories that are not always like positive, or they are very complex. The process of migration and, you know, the life in Chicago was not so. You know, the films just records not only like events, but also sometimes are so much connected with the experiences, and people remember through them also. So it might be definitely a difficult for them.
Thank you very much for your answer. Thank you. So I see, I don't see any more questions. So on behalf of, is there anyone?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Could you speak up? Okay.
In the case of Mary Anselmo's family, they had 100 films, and I assumed it'd stand a longer period of time because they actually had a concept of kind of like recording history, family history. I think in my family, it was a burst. It was maybe for a few years, and then it fell away. So there was not a concerted, continuous, long-term effort to do documentation. It was more like buy camera. Hey, this is kind of neat. But then, it's expensive to develop the films, and actually it's a bit of trouble to even take the films, and then who's going to see them. And so it falls away. I'm curious, and I think in the Jan Lorish films, I got the impression that there were only a handful of films, and all made more or less at the same time. So I guess my question is, do you find that these are mostly that most families made films in a burst of filmmaking and then stopped? And with a few, like that actually felt they were doing a long-term documentation.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people just bought their movie camera because it was like trendy things to do. Like all the people just were like, they often describe it, but as something that people were doing. So they also bought a camera because it was, you know, it was pretty popular at that, you know, during the 60s, for example. That was something that people often do in their like, you know, or they thought that that was the situation, because it's obviously it depends of the the social status, but there's a lot of people who just recorded like few movies, just a few, and they they explain it to me as as something that they were not very into. So I think that on the one hand you can have the collections that are that contains a lot of movies are might be because people on the one hand find important to document something, or just have fun doing that. I mean, like, this interest of technology and recording your everyday life not always was, connected with some, how to say it, like conscious documentation of your life, but sometimes it was just some like things that you want to watch with people, watch with your family. Sometimes it was just also like technology that people were interested in, and they started with Super 8 millimeter camera, but they went through all the 80s and 90s recording on video camera. So you have this like a vast collection of film from different like periods and different formats, because they were just like having fun doing so. I think that for a lot of people it was a really complicated, because as you said, you need to buy a movie, you need to take the movie or send the movie to Kodak and wait for processing the movie, then you get the movie back, and you have to think about what to do, like to project it with the family, maybe to splice it together. So there was a lot of work actually connected with making films and watching films, and I have also like examples where people were made films, but they were never watched those films together. They just like they don't even remember if they watched it together like as a family. Maybe someone watched it, but it was not like a family event to watch them together. So and you also mentioned the Lorish family collection. So the problem with all those collections is that, maybe not all of those collections, but some collection you can't say what was the whole collection, because the films that were preserved or survived many years might be just a very small part of the collection that was actually made. So the films that was actually made, they were just thrown away, or someone keep only a small part of them. With moving to other houses, some of the films were just lost. So it's really difficult to say what will be the whole collection, what other films will be in this collection. And I think this is the case with Lorish family collection, that most of the films were definitely lost, or I don't know, but it's not the whole thing. So it's really difficult, to say what was it. But thank you so much, for this further question. But I remember that your mother's collection is pretty large. There's a lot of films, even if it was very short period of time.
Yeah, Agatha, if I could just only add, I have very strong memories of my father sitting in the living room using an editing device. And as you mentioned, first of all, getting the equipment, because most of the times film cameras you had to buy at a camera store, a photographic store, though with time it was made available in other retail outlets. But getting the film, shooting it, then sending it out for processing, then waiting for it to come back, and then editing it, buying a movie projector, buying a movie screen, To show the movies. It's not like today where you take your iPhone and you record something, and next moment you're sharing it with hundreds of friends. Just to make a small display, a presentation of a movie was a big deal. And I remember at our house when my dad finally finished editing 5 or 6 different reels of film, putting it together on a larger roll, and then bringing out the movie screen, taking all the shades, pulling the shades down, because sometimes it was during the day, setting up the movie projector. This was a big deal. It was, if you wanted to watch a movie, you had to make a very strong effort to do it. It's, and even, progressing with time, you get to video with videotapes, first the VHS and then later the other formats. Much easier because you could show it on your TV by hooking up the device to play it. So to show a movie back then was a huge effort to show it to whether family or friends. And usually it was reserved for special occasion, holidays and things like that, when you knew there were a whole bunch of people. But besides that, it wasn't an easy thing to do.
Yeah, that's true. And I have this the collection from Binkowski family that was kept by a daughter, Micheline Jamiński. Was like, I think that the films were also screened during the like community events. That was not very popular because most of the films, like home movies, were the records of like a family life. But because of the collection, because the collection was shot during this, like some picnics, like club picnics and meetings, etc. They were also screened for the community, not only for the family. But as you said, that was like a lot of things to do to be able to just sit down and watch the films together. So it was really you needed to put a lot of effort to do it. But when you see how much of the material was shot in Chicago alone, because I focus on Chicagoland, but there's like thousands of films out there definitely that was recorded. So it was something that people pursue and wanted to do for some reasons. So yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we are slowly approaching the end of our webinar. So on behalf of all of us gathered here, I'd like to thank our speaker once more for this fascinating presentation and a great discussion. And before we say goodbye, a short info. Our next webinar is scheduled for February the 21st, and it will be a meeting with Gavin Moulton, who's working on Polish churches in North America. And in the meantime, we hope to see you at our annual conference in Chicago in January. And I must say, I can already feel that wind chill outside, but at the same time, the warmth that comes with thinking about meeting friends and colleagues and exchanging knowledge and experience. So I hope to see a lot of you there. Once more, thanks to our presenter and thanks to our audience, and have a great weekend.
Yeah,
Bye.
thank you so much, and see you in Chicago soon.
See you. Bye.
Bye.
Do zobaczenia, dziękuję.